A United States warship just fired warning shots in the Arabian Sea, not at a military target, not at a hostile vessel, at a cargo ship carrying 50 tons of silver, 50 tons, 1.6 million ounces, seized in international waters. Iran is calling it an act of war, and they might not be wrong. I need you to understand the gravity of what just happened. I need you to understand that we are not talking about a routine customs inspection. We are not talking about a drug bust or a weapons interdiction. We are talking about the United States Navy, the most powerful naval force in human history, deploying a guided missile destroyer to intercept cargo ships carrying precious metals. We are talking about American sailors boarding foreign vessels in international waters and seizing silver. This is not normal. This has never happened before. And the implications are so severe that governments around the world are holding emergency meetings right now trying to figure out what comes next. Let me walk you through exactly what happened, because the details matter. 3 days ago, the USS Gravely, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer operating in the Arabian Sea, received intelligence about an Iranian convoy heading south toward the Gulf of Oman. The convoy consisted of 3 cargo vessels flying Iranian flags. According to the official statement from U.S. Central Command, the vessels were suspected of carrying contraband materials in violation of international sanctions. What they did not say in that statement, what they buried in classified briefings, is that the contraband was silver. 50 tons of refined silver bars, 1.6 million ounces, worth approximately $150 million at current prices. And it was heading to China. The Gravely intercepted the convoy approximately 200 nautical miles off the coast of Oman. They issued radio commands ordering the vessels to stop for inspection. The Iranian captains refused. They claimed sovereign immunity. They claimed they were in international waters. They claimed the cargo was legal. And then the Gravely fired warning shots, not across the bow, at the bow, close enough to make it clear that the next shots would not be warnings. The convoy stopped. U.S. Navy SEALs boarded the vessels. They secured the crews. They inspected the cargo holds. And they found what the intelligence had promised: pallets upon pallets of silver bars, Iranian markings, Chinese destination documents, 50 tons in total, split across the 3 vessels. The SEALs photographed everything. They documented the serial numbers on the bars. They cataloged the shipping manifests. And then they seized it all. The silver is now sitting in a secure facility at Naval Support Activity Bahrain. The crews have been detained for questioning. The vessels have been impounded, and the Iranian government is losing its mind. The statement from Tehran came within hours. The Foreign Ministry called it an act of piracy on the high seas. The Revolutionary Guard called it a declaration of war. The Supreme Leader issued a statement promising severe consequences for this criminal aggression. They are demanding immediate return of the silver. They are demanding release of the crews. They are demanding an apology from the United States government, and they are threatening retaliation that will make America regret this decision. Now I need to explain why this happened. Because the United States does not deploy guided missile destroyers to steal silver on a whim. There is a reason behind this action, and the reason reveals everything about how desperate the situation has become. The silver was heading to China. That is the key fact. Iran has been quietly exporting silver to China for months as a way to circumvent U.S. sanctions. They cannot sell oil freely because of the sanctions. They cannot access the global banking system because of the sanctions. But they can trade physical commodities through backdoor channels. Silver has become one of those channels. Iran mines approximately 5 million ounces of silver per year. Not a huge amount by global standards, but enough to generate significant revenue if sold at current prices, and China is more than happy to buy. China needs silver desperately. Their solar industry consumes over 150 million ounces per year. Their electronics industry needs tens of millions more. They are paying premium prices for every ounce they can secure, and they do not care where it comes from. The Iran-China silver pipeline has been operating quietly for at least a year. Small shipments, circuitous routes, falsified documentation, the kind of trade that happens in the shadows of the global economy. But this convoy was different. This convoy was large, 50 tons in a single shipment. That is not a routine transaction. That is a strategic transfer, and someone in the American intelligence community decided it had to be stopped. Here's what you need to understand about the strategic calculus. The United States is not just enforcing sanctions. The United States is fighting a resource war, a war for physical metal, a war for the commodities that will determine which nations thrive and which nations collapse in the coming decades. China is winning that war. They are securing supply from every available source. Russia, Iran, Africa, South America. They are building a resource empire while the West argues about climate policy and social issues. And the American strategists have finally woken up to the threat. The seizure is not about Iran. It is about China. It is about denying China access to critical materials. It is about disrupting the supply chains that are making China stronger every day. The 50 tons of silver that now sits in Bahrain is 50 tons that will not power Chinese solar panels. It is 50 tons that will not go into Chinese electronics. It is 50 tons that will not strengthen the Chinese economy at America's expense. That is the real calculation. Iran is just the middleman. China is the target. But here is where things get dangerous. Here is where this incident could spiral into something much larger. Iran has options, Iran has leverage, and Iran is not going to let this stand without a response. The Strait of Hormuz, 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, one of the most critical choke points in global trade. Approximately 20% of the world's oil passes through this strait every single day, and Iran controls the northern shore. For decades, Iran has threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz in response to Western aggression. They have conducted military exercises, simulating a blockade. They have deployed fast attack boats and anti-ship missiles along the coastline. They have made it very clear that they have the capability to shut down this waterway if they choose to do so. After the silver seizure, those threats are no longer hypothetical. The Revolutionary Guard has announced enhanced naval patrols in the strait. They have moved additional missile batteries to coastal positions. They have warned that any vessel carrying American cargo could be subject to inspection and seizure. Reciprocity, they call it. You seized our silver, we will seize your shipments. An eye for an eye, a ton for a ton. Now think about what this means for the silver market specifically. A significant portion of global silver trade passes through or near the Strait of Hormuz. Silver refined in India often transits through these waters on its way to Western markets. Silver from Australian mines frequently takes this route to European refineries. If Iran begins stopping and inspecting vessels, if they begin seizing cargoes in retaliation for the American action, the entire logistics chain breaks down. Insurance rates for vessels transiting the strait will skyrocket. Shipping companies will refuse to take the risk. The silver that is supposed to flow from east to west will be trapped. And the already critical supply shortage will become catastrophic. The market is already pricing in this risk. Since the seizure became public, silver has moved up $7. $7 in 72 hours. That is not normal price action. That is fear. That is traders and industrial users realizing that supply chains they took for granted are now at risk. That is procurement managers at major corporations being told to secure inventory immediately because nobody knows what happens next. That is the beginning of a panic. Let me put the seized silver in perspective. 50 tons is 1.6 million ounces. That is approximately equivalent to 320 COMEX contracts. That is roughly 1.5% of the entire COMEX registered inventory seized in a single incident. 1.5%? Gone. Not delivered to the intended buyer. Not available for the market. Sitting in a military warehouse for God knows how long while lawyers and diplomats argue about what happens next. And this is just the first seizure. If the United States is willing to intercept Iranian silver convoys, what else are they willing to do? Are they willing to intercept Russian shipments? Are they willing to seize Chinese vessels? Are they willing to extend this resource war to every corner of the globe? The precedent has been set. The rules of engagement have changed. And every nation that ships silver by sea is now calculating the risk that their cargo might be the next one to be intercepted. The Chinese response has been measured, but ominous. The Foreign Ministry issued a statement condemning the seizure as a violation of international law and freedom of navigation. They called on the United States to immediately release the silver and compensate Iran for the illegal action. But behind the diplomatic language, you can sense the fury. China was counting on that silver. Chinese factories were waiting for that silver. Chinese strategic planners had allocated that silver in their supply projections, and now it is gone, taken by the Americans, sitting in a warehouse in Bahrain. China has options too. They hold over $1 trillion in U.S. Treasury bonds. They control rare earth processing that the American technology industry depends on. They manufacture components that cannot be sourced anywhere else. If they decide to retaliate economically, the pain will be severe. And the silver seizure gives them justification. It gives them a casus belli for economic warfare. We were just trying to buy silver legally, and the Americans committed piracy. That is the narrative they will use. That is the story they will tell the world. The insurance implications alone are staggering. Lloyd's of London has already issued a notice designating the Arabian Sea as a high-risk area. Premiums for vessels transiting the region have increased by 40% overnight. Some insurers are refusing coverage entirely. This means that even if Iran does not retaliate directly, the cost of shipping silver through this region has permanently increased. Those costs get passed on. They show up in the price of refined silver. They show up in the premiums you pay at the coin dealer. They show up everywhere. Let me address what the mainstream media is saying because it is important to understand how this story is being framed. The official narrative is that this was a sanctions enforcement action. Iran is under sanctions. Iran was shipping contraband. The United States has the right and responsibility to enforce those sanctions. That is the story you will hear on CNN and Fox and the BBC. What they will not tell you is that silver is not explicitly sanctioned. What they will not tell you is that this seizure stretches the legal interpretation of sanctions to the breaking point. What they will not tell you is that international maritime lawyers are already calling this action legally dubious at best and outright piracy at worst. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea is very clear about freedom of navigation in international waters. Vessels have the right to transit without interference. Seizures require either consent or Security Council authorization. The United States had neither. They acted unilaterally. They used military force to take property that belonged to another nation. That is the textbook definition of piracy, regardless of how you feel about Iran or sanctions or geopolitics. This matters because it sets a precedent. If the United States can seize Iranian silver today, they can seize anyone's silver tomorrow. If military force can be used to intercept commodity shipments, then no shipment is safe. The entire foundation of global trade rests on the assumption that goods can move freely across oceans. That assumption just took a torpedo below the waterline. The silver market was already in crisis before this happened. The COMEX was already draining. The Shanghai premium was already exploding. Industrial demand was already exceeding supply. This seizure does not create a new crisis. It pours gasoline on an existing fire. It adds geopolitical risk to a market that was already struggling with fundamental supply problems. It introduces the possibility of naval warfare to a commodity that people thought was boring. I have been covering the silver market for years. I have seen supply disruptions, I have seen demand spikes, I have seen manipulation and short squeezes, but I have never seen a United States warship fire weapons to seize silver. I have never seen a precious metal become the center of a potential military conflict between major powers. This is genuinely unprecedented, and anyone who tells you they know exactly how it plays out is lying. What I can tell you is that the direction is clear. Supply is getting tighter, risks are getting higher. The lengths that nations are willing to go to secure metal are getting more extreme. Firing warning shots at cargo ships is not the action of a confident nation with abundant resources. It is the action of a desperate nation fighting for scraps. And that desperation is going to drive prices higher. It is going to drive premiums higher. It is going to make physical silver more valuable and more difficult to obtain. The 50 tons sitting in Bahrain might seem like a distant abstraction, but it is connected to the silver in your safe. It is connected to the price you pay at the dealer. It is connected to the premiums on American Eagles and Canadian Maples. Everything in this market is connected. And when the U.S. Navy starts seizing silver shipments in the Arabian Sea, those connections transmit shockwaves around the world. Iran is calling it an act of war. China is calling it piracy. The United States is calling it sanctions enforcement. The lawyers will argue for years about who is right. But the market does not care about legal arguments. The market cares about supply. And 50 tons of supply just disappeared into a military warehouse with no indication of when or if it will ever reach the market. The warning shots have been fired, literally. The battle for physical silver has moved from trading floors to the high seas, and this is only the beginning. If nations are willing to use naval force to seize metal today, what will they be willing to do when the shortages get worse? What happens when the vaults are truly empty and the desperation reaches a new level? This is not a drill. This is not a simulation. This is the new reality of the silver market, a reality where warships enforce supply chains, where 50 tons can disappear overnight, where the price reflects not just supply and demand, but geopolitical risk and military action. The silver that was heading to China will never get there. The silver that sits in Bahrain may never reach any market. And the message to the world is clear. Physical metal is so valuable, so critical, so essential, that the most powerful nation on earth is willing to fire weapons to control it. That is all you need to know about where prices are going. That is all you need to know about the value of what you hold. When navies start shooting over silver, the price on your screen is meaningless. The only price that matters is the price of possession. And that price just went up dramatically.